And so that's something I've always told my fellow colleagues, write for yourself, create that thing, find that way to do it. Don't wait on this industry. Just don't. I never waited.
Welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you, Tom. It's good to be here again. Hi.
I was very surprised that this is your first lead role.
Yeah, right. I know. I've been I've been working for a long time. I've had leading roles on stage, and I've always been sort of like in ensembles in television. But yeah, this is my first lead role. But I feel like it was I had everything that I needed to actually finally step into these shoes, especially Bayard Rustin in the film Rustin, because it called on everything that I've been doing as a supporting player for years. It called on extraordinary research and character work and development and vocal work and physical work, all the stuff that I've honed for 33 years in the theater and, playing different characters in television and film.
See, I was going to ask you, how does it feel? But I'm kind of hearing it. Like, you, over the years, have accumulated technical ability, leadership ability,
Yeah.
sort of ineffable ability, all leading to, like, when the time comes, you can do it.
I think you're right, because a lot of times I think maybe some of my peers step into these roles. Maybe if it's too soon, they don't know the weight or what they need to do to carry a film. And not only carry a film as a performer, but as a leader. Number one on the call sheet is a hefty position, especially if you are in every frame of a film. And you've got to do your own character work and development and research, and then be available to your co-stars and to the producing team, all departments. It calls on a lot. And I don't know if I would have been ready to lead a film like this maybe 10 years ago. I needed to actually have all this underneath me as being a supporting player in other films like Beale Street to Talk or Zola, Selma, you name it. I was always the one to sort of make sure that I took care of the company in films. Maybe I planned dinners, anything, make sure that everything's working well and operating between cast, crew, and producers. That's always been my role. So I understood how to do that. So now to add leading actor on top of it, I was ready. And I feel like it does feel great, because it feels like it's calling on sort of my superpowers. You know what I mean?
I want to talk about how you accumulated those superpowers through your family and through your work, but I wanted to start this way in talking about your story a little bit. So I was there the evening that you received the TIFF Tribute Award. I happened to be in the audience that night. It was a really beautiful night, and in your speech, you hinted at a story that I wanted to get from you.
Okay.
What's the story on the circus? You started out in the circus?
Yes, that's one of my very first jobs. When I moved to San Francisco in the early 90s, about 1991, I was an actor, I did some studies with some private coaches, you name it. And then, I was trying to get a gig. I did educational children's theater for a bit. When you tour around to high schools, you put up the set and take it down. And then, I saw in the trades one ad for a company called Make a Circus. And it was a company that was a political children's circus. It was really,
great.
Dealt with
Great. Another one of those.
Another one of those. But it really dealt with these themes, but in a way for children to understand what's happening in the world and learn about civics and all.
Really? Through circus?
Yes, through circus, through a company called Make a Circus. So I saw it in the trades. I'd never heard of them. I never thought about it. They were looking for performers who could move and people who are willing to learn. And I was like, well, that sounds like me. I'm 21 and skinny and ready to do anything. So I go to the audition, and they had these, masters of whether clowning and gymnastics, they're all there, and they're teaching you some beginning skills. And I was game. And one of the teachers, his name is Master Lu Yi. He said, "Oh, Colman, you have Muchi." I said, "What's Muchi?" And he said, "You have a big heart. You're willing to try and do anything." And so I was like, I just soaked it all in. So the beginnings of my career was educational children's theater and circus. And so if anyone can really look at my career now, it explains a lot. I was always willing to try and take a risk and a leap of faith. And, I became an aerial web artist. That's that rope that you climb up, maybe up, 150 feet in the air, spinning around, things like that. I did 6 feet tall stilts. I learned clowning and juggling. I juggled 5 pins. I juggled 5 balls. Yeah, man. And I taught, and then I would teach those skills to kids as well. So
do you still have them? Do you still knock them out sometimes? Can you still?
No, not at all. I did actually go to a circus school in Chicago early this year, just for the show that I have called You Are Here, that's on AMC. And I was sort of retracing my roots and finding out things that taught me to be who I am. So I took a clowning workshop and a circus workshop, and that stuff hurts now when you're 54 years old.
Yeah, Bozo retired early. That's the only clown I know. Though that's not true. I've talked to people on the show that talked to me a little bit about clowning, and they made me appreciate it on a far deeper level. And when I was doing research for this, I heard you say over and over again that whenever you were asked about the circus, that you were taught how to keep the heart of a clown. What does that mean?
There was a teacher named Joan Mencken. She's no longer with us, but she would teach me. She had a clown. One of her famous clowns was called Queenie, and Queenie was a rocker. She was funny and weird and open. There's an openness to clowns that I learned about, where you have to have a sense of vulnerability. That's you're being willing to fail, to look like a fool, and then also to lead with your heart. You always lead with a sensitive heart that can always be broken at any point. So I think the heart of a clown, at the core, as I'm thinking about it, is a sense of vulnerability and joy and fearlessness, to be wrong, to look like a fool, to look absolutely stupid. But knowing that it's going to lead you to somewhere. So I've always used that in my work, even when I'm in rehearsals or I'm on sets. I will always tell a director, hey, for the first 4 takes, I might not look like what I'm doing. I'm in process. I'm figuring some stuff out. I've done my research, but now I'm trying to figure out where the cameras are, what lighting, how it all operates. I said, but I'm willing to not look perfect. I'm willing for it not to be great. And I think that's okay, because I'm working through it. And a lot of times people want sort of the produced version very quickly. And I just never worked that way. I've never worked that way, because that's in my core. That's how I discover it and find and make it real and organic each time. It's with a sense of vulnerability and a sense of being able to say, cool, I might jack this up and it's okay.
You got to be able to look stupid. You have to be able to fall on your face. You have to be able to try things, and then eventually you'll hone in on it.
Yeah, and then you also have to be willing to, again, I'm pressing down on vulnerability, to be vulnerable, and because I think that's where you find love as well. There's love, I know, in my performances, because that's what I seek. There's love in some way, shape, or form. Even when I'm playing villains, there's love there. There's grace, there's humility, there's humanity somewhere in there. It's colored in there because that's where I'm coming from.
I know we've been talking a little bit about some of the advice you got over the years in your early days as an actor. I know one of the more formative pieces of advice you got was from your mom. She gives you some advice that kind of changes everything. Can you tell us what she told you about service?
When I was a young actor in San Francisco, I was like any other young actor, just very obsessed with themselves and not getting work.
The actor's journey, by the way.
Yeah, the actor's journey.
Yeah.
And I remember one day my mom, I think I was just like griping to her on the phone about something, ridiculous. And she was like, hey, have you, I think you should volunteer. You got a lot of time in your hand. You need to volunteer. I was like, volunteer, why? So she said, I think you need to do something that's not about yourself. And she said, I think it'll be good for you. And because it was something that my mother always did. My mother was always volunteering somewhere. She was with the PTA. She drove her Chevrolet station wagon to pick up lunches for me and my class, my whole class, for class trips and all. So my mother was always doing things in the community. She was the block captain in our neighborhood. So my mother, she was like, okay, great. She said, you need to work with kids. She said, you're always good with kids. Is there any way you can volunteer and work with kids? And funny enough, I had a friend who was a teacher, and she said, "Oh man, man, we would love to have um, to be considered for an after-school program teacher. There's not a lot of men, and like that'd be a great influence in young boys and young girls, all that stuff." So I got a job as an after-school program teacher. I volunteered, and I loved it. I loved it so much because I loved just being there for kids. My whole purpose, it wasn't to make money. It was I was there to help tie their shoe and make sure they had what they needed or did their homework with them. I felt good about myself. And so it was like this gift of service that I've learned that actually fills you up.
But does that do something for the acting?
Yeah, it really did, because it really makes you feel like you're doing something for humanity. You're moving the needle. You're using whatever you have, whatever you've created to better somebody else. And that's what I do feel works for me in my acting. I feel like acting is a service job. It is a service job, just like bartending, just like waiting tables. It actually is. I think it is. You're being in service to story, to the company, and then hopefully to humanity in some way with the work that you choose.
That's beautiful, and I can tell you take it really seriously. I was reading an interview with you where you talked about something called being an equity deputy in shows. Yes. What does that mean?
And for all my theater people out there, I don't know if they have this role in Canadian theaters, but in America, with Actors Equity, you're always voted on the first day for someone to be the equity deputy. Now, you don't wear a badge or anything like that. You're not like a sheriff, but it's a position where you're the one to be the go-between between yourself and producers. If there's any needs, any questions about safety, about hours, about working conditions, you name it. So it's really like sort of you're deputized to take care of the company. And usually most people look at me like, oh, that's the one who can do it, because you need to have a sense of diplomacy.
Right.
It's
okay. So just to be clear, you're not always the one raising your hand. People are looking at you going like, he's going to do it.
Yeah, people are always looking at me. No one wants to be the equity deputy usually, because it also, you just like, but at some point you realize, you look around, you're like, I'm the best one for the job. I'm after a while you realize you're like, I'm actually the best one to do it. I'll volunteer myself.
But that's service.
Yeah, because you're like, I care about the company and I want things to go well. And I think I know how to do it. I don't know how to do, I won't say I'm perfect at everything, but like that, I know how to do. I know how to look after people. And I'm somebody who knows how to throw a good party. And it's consistent. And I know that that's a gift that I have. I know how to curate the whole thing. And so basically the equity deputy is sort of like being a great party planner as well, making sure you're looking out for everybody.
One more question about you before we move on to the film. I was talking about your mom just then and her teaching you about service. I also read that she wrote Oprah a bunch of times.
Oh, yeah.
On your behalf when you were starting out. Is that true?
Yeah. She wrote to Oprah all the time.
Why?
Like, I would say at least minimum 6 times, because I had at least 6 conversations with her about it, where she would just casually say, well, I wrote Oprah today. I was like, why? She said, because Oprah can help you. She helps people on her show. Okay, how's she going to help me? She just needs to know you, and if she knows about you, get you on her show, people will know how fantastic of an actor you are.
Oh.
I'm like, oh. And of course, for me, I was just like, that doesn't make sense to me. It just didn't make sense. I was very much a realist in a way. But my mother she would always say things like, well, you got to play the game to win. She said, so I wrote letters. So that always showed my mother had so much faith, and she was a dreamer and someone who just believed. And I think in turn, she taught me that. I don't know if I had that initially, but I knew that I learned from her to actually have a bit more faith in things that I can't see. And I look at my career now. This is all my mother's faith. It has to be. And I think she impressed that upon me, to have some belief and faith. Where I'm living, my home, all that stuff. It's so far from the realms of where I grew up.
Yeah.
And I have to believe that it was an incredible amount of faith that was poured in me and around me that eventually seeped in. Sometimes you got to go on the wishes and prayers of others. Even if you don't have them yourself, you're like, okay, let me believe it because you believe it.
Did you ever mention to Oprah your mom's letters?
Absolutely. Just last year, I was on a hike with Oprah in Maui, and it dawned on me. I was like, because I literally we're just going on this beautiful, beautiful hike, and it's gorgeous. And somehow there was a group of us, a group of maybe 25 people, and we just kept sort of moving in and out of each other's spaces. And suddenly it was me and Oprah walking together privately. And then I just said, hey, and it's weird because I don't like to sort of like, Oprah has become such a friend and a dear to me that I never want her to feel like she's Oprah
Yeah.
with me.
Yeah.
That pressure
Yeah.
of like,
Yeah.
'cause usually when people meet Oprah, they fall out and they cry and like, you changed my life. I'm like,
Yeah.
I treat her as someone who's just dear in my life. And
Yeah.
like anyone, like I would treat you as well.
Yeah.
So I say to her, I say, hey, can I tell you something? She said, what? What is it? I said, my mother wrote you like 6 times. She said, what? I said, yeah, she wrote you about 6 times. And I think I finally realized that her letters were answered. And she just stood there, and I'll never forget, she just held her breath and looked at me. And we didn't say anything else. She just held my hand, and then we just kept walking. And that's all that needed to be said, was like, we never know how we're supposed to be connected. And it dawned on me in that moment that these were the dreams of my mother.
What was your mom's name?
Edith.
Edith. Let me reintroduce you here. I'm Tom Bauer. I'm speaking to the actor Colman Domingo. He stars in the new film Rustin on Netflix. It's about the often overlooked civil rights leader, Bayard Rustin, advisor to Martin Luther King Jr., one of the major architects of the March on Washington. I use overlooked there. I highlight it there on purpose, because especially compared to MLK, I mean, incredibly overlooked, especially in popular culture. When did you first hear about Bayard Rustin?
I would like to say he's not only overlooked, he's unsung and practically erased. And I first learned about Bayard Rustin when I was about 19 years old as a student at Temple University in Philadelphia. And I joined the African American Student Union. And I joined it because I wanted to find out more about my own history, because I feel like there was a lack of that. You're looking for North Stars in many ways. And so I joined this African American Student Union, and we're having a conversation about the civil rights movement. And Bayard Rustin's name came up about being the architect of the March on Washington. And all these, and we inquired a bit more, and we're like, oh, he was a Quaker, and he sang Elizabethan love songs, and he played the lute.
Played the lute, yeah.
He was from Westchester, Pennsylvania, tall, black, and openly gay. And I said, wait, what? And at that time, now that I look at it, at 19 years old, I was not out of the closet or anything like that. But I was like, oh, because I didn't see examples from myself, like how to be in the world or how I can be. And then I was like, wait, so I was drawn to him. I was like, okay, so this person was such a singular human being, and smart and interesting and funny, and he did something for our entire country. He devoted his life to service for our country, and nobody knows about him. Why? Oh, it's because he didn't fit the profile of what representations of the civil rights movement look like.
What did they look like? What did representations of the civil rights movement look like?
It looked like Martin Luther King. It looked like Ralph Abernathy. It looked like cis men. It looked like, men buttoned up with suits and ties on. And I see, to be honest, when I look at it, there was a need for that, because it was a cohesive need of like saying, this is how we represent ourselves.
Right.
But Bayard was always an outlier. And that was also part of his gift. He saw things differently. You know what I mean? All that, and people always think that, especially when you really unpack the civil rights movement, and you look at any of these movements of galvanizing so many African Americans and white folks as well for civil and human rights, people always think it was a very monolithic ideals that they had. No, there were all these different groups with different ideas of how to get things done.
Arguing and fighting and
arguing
and alienating one another.
Nasty and alienating, absolutely. Yeah. And Bayard Rustin, a queer Quaker from Westchester, Pennsylvania, was the one who had the idea to galvanize everyone and how to form coalitions with unions and things like that. So he was just such a fascinating human being. And I started to realize that was part of his gift.
You had to work vocally I said in the introduction, I said you had to work physically, you had to work
Yes.
emotionally, and you had to work vocally. You were able to speak to activists who knew Bayard Rustin while he was organizing the March on Washington. Bayard Rustin's voice has a very particular sound, as does yours in the film. How did they literally help you find your voice for this
You
film?
know, as I was doing my research on Bayard, I would hear a mid-Atlantic accent from time to time. I would hear a British accent. I would, his voice is, it sits a bit up here, actually. And he would sing a bit up here. And he would sing up here too, because he was the tenor. So that's a lot to maintain for a film, to be honest. But also that's what he spoke.
Yeah, right, right,
And
right, right,
also
right.
what was interesting to me, it was like, it kept changing. I was like, what is this accent? But he's from Westchester, Pennsylvania. Did he spend time in London? Or like, what is this accent? And I asked Rochelle Horowitz, who is one of his dearest friends and comrades, who's also featured in the film, played by Lily Kay, beautifully. I said, well, what is this accent? She said, well, he made that up. I said, I was blown away by it. I'm like, who makes up an accent? First of all, I think that's kind of dope. But then I also thought, well, what are the reasons why? She said, well, he did have a speech impediment. He would use language to over articulate. And he was also an Anglophile, so he would love to sound with a bit more of a flourish. He was already an outlier in so many different ways. And I guess he was just like, you know, look, I got one more thing that's going to be my own, since I'm so on the outside anyway. So, and he would use it to effect. And in the film, I made sure we sort of brought my voice down maybe a couple octaves and found a good middle ground. But I would use it to effect of like when he needs to have a flourish in certain rooms, whether he's with men from the NAACP or if he's in private. Sometimes it would fall away. So I wanted to make choices, when it comes to dramatically and dramaturgically on when he used that voice. So that's what I had to change it all. Yes, and wear a prosthetic of teeth missing and on the right side of my face.
What did that do?
That helps you. You have to truly over articulate. I will put the prosthetics in at least an hour and a half before I was set to go on set, and I would work with it. I would work vocal exercises, dentalizing exercises, because also he spoke. When people watch the film, you see he spoke with alacrity. He spoke with cheerful readiness, and he was moving through language at a pace. So he had no time to stop, because I had parenthetical after parenthetical. He speaks in volumes. So I had to find his speech patterns, because that's what I heard as well. But also had a barrier, which really helped me make it absolutely clear and relish the words that I was using, because I had this barrier.
Oh, that's beautiful, Colman. The idea that you had to speak in these essays, this essayistic way of talking, this very poetic,
Yes.
and by having the challenge of literally getting the words out, you had to relish every single word you were going to say.
To chew on these words, absolutely.
And secondly, I mean, isn't there something to be made? I don't know if I have a question for this, but isn't there something to be made about, in the 1950s, an openly gay Black Quaker having to create himself, create his own voice? There's meaning there.
I think there's such meaning there. I think that it really goes back to the way he was raised. He was raised by his grandparents, and they really did give him a solid foundation for being in the world and believing that he was the smartest. He was athletic. He had purpose and a soul. And so that's the way he went out into the world. The way the world was set up in 1950s, 1960s was different than the way on his interior he was set up. He was set up to be full in his experience, and the world be damned, you know? And I think even the rooms what I love is like what we actually see him navigating even in the film is that he was always in these spaces that were telling him he had no right to be there. And he was demanding to have the same space and shared space in every single way, and also people knew he was the smartest person in the room. He was a chief organizer. He was a strategist. He was, you just couldn't deny it. So it's like, he was defiantly joyful and wildly intelligent. And that's one thing he led with. And I love that he didn't sort of back down with that. But when I think the world would challenge him in every single way to suppress all of it.
There's the film, for people who don't know, was produced by the production company owned by the Obamas. And I guess it made me think a little bit about, I mean, the number of speeches, and when I read the former president's book, and I was, following his life and his speeches over the years. One thing I found that he keeps on, maybe this is just me reading into the film, but one thing I feel like comes up over and over again in the way he talks about history is that actual work and actual change gets done not through cinematic historical figures that were taught in school, but by often boring work done by remarkable people in an uncinematic way.
Yes. And that's exactly what I love about our film, because there's so many scenes it's really just about organizing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it makes it kind of sexy. There's nothing happening but people in a room fighting out the best way to do something.
Yeah.
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 You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Which is like, yeah, it's an incredible, to make a film about organizing sexy and interesting is very courageous, I think. And I think, but I know that the purpose of it is, like you said, we're trying to rouse people to believe that they have power, to own their power, and wherever they are in the landscape, that they owning their power is the most important thing, and owning their space, and saying they have, and that they're ordinary. These were all ordinary people, everybody, who were just trying to do what was in front of them. They didn't have some superpowers and suddenly they were a leader. No, there was a bunch of people. Yeah. And it was never just Martin Luther King. It was all those other people, the people who were doing the mailers or licking stamps, or,
setting up the microphone, the
microphone.
Yeah, yeah.
Every single person had something to do and was a part of the movement.
Yeah.
And I think it's trying to rouse people with that spirit now, because, especially right now when things feel so dark in this world, people don't know what to do. And I'm always telling people, just do what's in front of you. Do that simple thing that you can do today. That's all that's required. That means you're a part of it.
Did you talk to the president about it?
Yes. Yes, I did.
I'll wait you out.
You know what?
I'll sit here all day.
Listen. President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama could not have been more supportive and loving and caring, especially around this first narrative feature. That tells you a lot about who they are. President Barack Obama literally told me, he said, well, if there was no Bayard Rustin, there would be no Barack Obama, because I followed him as a North Star on how to be a community leader in many ways. So he gave Bayard Rustin posthumously the Presidential Medal of Freedom in, I believe, 2013. Mm-hmm. And that says a lot. I think they made sure that they were available. They noted the film and went through drafts. They noted, by the time we got to the edits, they were very much in on the edits and wanted to make sure that this film was what they hoped it could be. I mean, they're two people who are very much, and that's the thing, getting to know them, I know truly it's in their soul that it's a life of service. It's a life of service. And I think, and then I think as an artist, I try to even find that for myself, even more so now, of like, what am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing on this planet with what I have and the platform I have? I tell
you what you're doing. I mean, to take it down to a concrete level, you're doing a lot. And I don't mean that in a way. I mean, I'm glad we talked about service, and I'm glad we talked about the meaning of this film, and about. I mean, again, I'm just enamored with my dad was an organizer, so I'm just enamored with the idea. Union organizer in Newfoundland. I'm just like enamored with the idea of the boring work that gets done to make people's lives better. But also you're just doing a lot. Like I went to see The Color Purple the other night, the screening of the musical version of The Color Purple. You were in that. You were in Sing Sing, one of the new A24 movies, and you're in Rustin. Colman, that's a lot. How are you doing with it? Are you tired?
I sound very lazy. You're like, Colman, can you get off the couch and go do something? Listen, it feels great, man. Especially you're naming these three films. These are things that I'm very conscious of what I do and what I'm going to be a part of, because I feel like I just want to be useful with my gifts, my talents. And especially now, I've been working now for 33 years. And, amassed some respect in this industry, and, I have my own home, and, I can eat where I want to. Now, even more so of a choice to be even clear about what I do. So even like my film Sing Sing that'll come out next year, I put it together with my production company and the other production companies, and it's an independent feature that we just did because we believed it mattered. These stories of, incarcerated men working out their emotions and feelings while on parole, by putting on a play, a rehabilitation through theater arts program that's in Sing Sing. So that was important to us, to create this narrative and believe that these stories matter. And this helps move the needle on our humanity. You have more programs like this, it really helps rehabilitation. So I feel like, and then when we sold that at TIFF to A24, and they were on with the mission too. So I feel like, okay, I'm onto something. I'm not crazy. I'm just doing the things that make sense to me and keeping them. And whether, I like to create things, whether or not they're going to be sold or not too. That's just what I do. I've always done that. I've always invested in myself. I'm like, let me do this thing because I feel like it matters in the world.
Yeah.
Whether we get a return or not, I don't know.
I'm getting the wrap, but I want to close this way. We've been talking about all the really amazing things that you've been doing. We talked about Sing Sing, talking about Rustin, briefly about The Color Purple. There's a lot being asked of you right now. There's a lot being talked of you right now. You're a big favorite for Oscar nominations this year. Do you care about that, by the way? Is that a thing?
Why not? I wouldn't be honest if I say it didn't matter.
Yeah. I
think what matters is, for this role, I actually was thinking about this in the car, to be honest. I thought, if the winds blow my way for that sort of honor, what it does, especially for the role, it honors Bayard Rustin, it honors Ella Baker, it honors A. Philip Randolph, Clea Robinson, all these organizers. I feel like it plants them deeply in the center of their of history. And I feel like, honestly, it's like, I know I gave everything I had in my heart and leadership and soul to do this work. And if it's amplified with that, more people get to see the film, more people feel inspired, it moves the needle. So I'm not going to sit here and say it doesn't matter. Well, I feel like, not that I did it for it, but if it comes, I'm for it.
But it reminds me of at the very beginning of Rustin, where your character talks about the importance of owning your power. Yeah. And as an actor who's been in the industry for 3 decades, who started out as a clown in a children's political circus, who is now riding this giant wave of huge projects and praise right now, whether it be production, directing, acting. How do you feel, to close things off, how do you feel in this moment that you're owning your power?
I started owning my power when I was about 21 years old, when I first started in this industry, when I had small professional theater companies. I don't know where this has come from. I think that I knew that the only power that I had was the fact that I can create, and no one can tell me not to create. That is a gift. And I knew that early on, because also that had to be a little bit of my armor going into this industry, because the industry wasn't set up for me to thrive in. It just wasn't. Yeah. For what I was interested in doing, the characters that I wanted to be play, it wasn't set up. I was set up to be a drug dealer, character, peripheral characters that were like, villains in some way. And it took me a long time. It took me a long time. That's why I became a writer and a director and a producer. I was going to always stay in it in some way and find my way around it. And so it's just continually been amplified of owning my power in every stage. And so that's something I've always told my fellow colleagues: write for yourself, create that thing, find that way to do it. Don't wait on this industry. Just don't. I never waited.
That's so well said, and such a beautiful thing. Colman, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, man. It's good to talk to you again.